Why did Russia lose a $250 million strategic bomber? Not because Ukraine launched a conventional airstrike, not because Moscow ran out of air defense systems, not because Putin's generals stopped caring about protecting critical military infrastructure, but because Kyiv understood something the Kremlin didn't. They knew exactly how to turn Russia's layered defense network into its own worst enemy. Right now, as you're watching this, military analysts across 3 continents are trying to understand how 17 autonomous aircraft managed to penetrate what was supposed to be an impenetrable fortress. The Kremlin's response wasn't triumphant. It was silent. Dead silent. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any press conference ever could. I'm Nora Blake, and on this channel, we don't accept official narratives without examining the operational mathematics behind them. This is Nora Blake, where we break down the geometry of modern conflict. If you value understanding how contemporary warfare actually functions beyond the headlines, hit that like button to help this analysis reach people who still think expensive defense systems guarantee victory. Your answer matters, and I read every single one because this community shapes how we approach these investigations. Share this video with anyone who thinks traditional air defense doctrine still works in an era of distributed autonomous systems. The age of algorithmic warfare is coming for every military establishment, whether we're ready or not. At precisely 17 minutes past 2 in the morning, inside the Kazan Gorbunov aviation facility, something catastrophic occurred. This wasn't just any manufacturing complex. This was the singular location on Earth capable of producing the Tu-160M, what Russian pilots call the White Swan. A single airframe carries a price tag of $270 million. The specific aircraft damaged in this incident was the same strategic bomber you might remember from previous coverage. It had been undergoing extensive repairs following damage sustained during an earlier Ukrainian operation at Engels 2 Air Base. Then, the NK-32 engine inlet experienced what engineers call a severe thermal incident. Flames spread rapidly through the maintenance bay. A cascading reaction ignited the most valuable component inventory stored within the facility. This happened mere hours after Moscow had retaliated against Ukraine using 156 drones that set Kyiv ablaze, plunged Odessa into complete darkness, and forced rail operations in Zhytomyr to halt entirely. The invoice had just arrived. -1 Tu-160M permanently removed from operational status. Moscow was absolutely livid. It appeared that Ukraine's attack on the Tu-160 at Engels 2 had crossed what Putin considered an unacceptable threshold. On the 12th of January 2025, Russia unleashed a massive barrage of 156 drones and missiles across Ukrainian territory. The capital was burning. Odessa went into total electrical blackout. Rail networks throughout Zhytomyr were completely paralyzed. From the Kremlin's perspective, this represented mission accomplished. They believed they had delivered a punishing lesson to Kiev. However, while Russian commanders were celebrating their retaliation, 700 kilometers to the east, a completely different calculation was taking place. Ukraine wasn't searching for media attention. They were hunting for a critical vulnerability. Their focus had locked onto Kazan, specifically targeting the Kazan Gorbunov manufacturing plant. This facility isn't simply another factory in Russia's industrial landscape. It represents the only location on the planet capable of manufacturing and servicing the NK-32 engine. These engines generate 55,000 pounds of thrust and serve as the beating heart of the Tu-160M fleet. If Kazan ceases operations, the White Swan stops flying. Period. I understand your thinking. Approaching this installation presents extraordinary challenges. The facility sits 750 miles beyond Ukrainian borders, shielded by multiple overlapping anti-access area denial systems. The S-400 Triumph scans the outer defensive perimeter, tracking anything airborne above minimal altitude. Buck M3 batteries provide mid-range coverage, while a dense network of Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 systems deliver point defense capabilities. Then there's the Krasuka 4, an electronic warfare platform specifically engineered to transform GPS signals into meaningless static. After a drone successfully ignited a fuel storage tank at this location the previous January, Russia reinforced the area with additional Panzer units. The strategic challenge was brutal. Deploying F-16s for a deep penetration strike using Storm Shadow missiles would be suicidal. An S-400 can establish target lock from 250 miles away. One 40 N-6E interceptor traveling at Mach 14 means losing a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Launching a single Neptune missile would simply provide expensive target practice for the Buk M3. A basic drone swarm flying independently would get shredded by Pantsir 30mm cannons long before reaching the tarmac. Ukraine recognized they couldn't simply force entry through the main defenses. They needed to manipulate the system itself. The trap was being set. Russian air defense was about to face a systematic overload scenario, forced to choose between phantom threats at high altitude and real attackers skimming the surface. Either way, the White Swan was about to experience a catastrophic morning. At 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 F-16s launched. 15 decoy unmanned aerial vehicles were deployed, specifically designed to replicate the radar signature of Storm Shadow missiles. Simultaneously, 6 Neptune missiles climbed to 30,000 feet, appearing like brilliant flares on Russian search radar systems. Inside a dimly illuminated Russian command bunker, the Nebo-M radar system, the massive technological eye of Kazan's defense network, suddenly erupted with warning alerts. At 250 miles out, something significant was approaching. To Russian operators monitoring their phosphorescent green displays, it resembled their nightmare scenario, a mass wave of Storm Shadow cruise missiles combined with heavy Neptune anti-ship missiles. If you were a Russian radar operator in that moment, you wouldn't hesitate. You've been trained for years believing the S-400 Triumph represents the world's best air defense system. So you do exactly what your training dictates. You flip the safety mechanisms, establish target locks, and release the interceptors. 8 40 N-6E missiles, each as long as a telephone pole and carrying sufficient kinetic energy to obliterate a building, roared off their launch rails. They tore into the night sky at a staggering Mach 14. Impact. One after another, Russian monitoring screens displayed target-destroyed confirmations. 10 decoys and 3 Neptune missiles were transformed into high-altitude debris. Inside the bunker, operators were literally celebrating. They were convinced they had just saved the factory and earned commendations. But here's the brilliant detail that almost everyone overlooks. Ukraine didn't just lose those assets. They deliberately expended them. Those 10 Storm Shadows were actually decoys equipped with radar reflectors. Think of it as deploying cardboard cutouts to a lethal gunfight. Ukraine had just manipulated Moscow into wasting 8 of its most sophisticated multi-million-dollar interceptors to destroy flying plastic and aluminum. It's a masterclass in return on investment, using $20,000 decoys to force the enemy to burn $2 million missiles. While S-400 crews celebrated their victory and began reloading procedures, they remained completely unaware of the actual threat. Because the S-400's radar is optimized for scanning the stratosphere for high-speed aircraft and missiles, it struggles with what's called ground clutter. Imagine trying to locate a specific insect on your lawn while looking through a telescope aimed at the moon. By maintaining flight altitude at just 260 feet above the Volga River, the swarm of 70 Bayraktar drones remained effectively invisible. They were literally concealed behind Earth's curvature and the riverbanks. Russian command was celebrating, convinced the threat had been neutralized. They had no awareness that while they were busy eliminating targets in the upper atmosphere, the real strike force was still advancing at 100 miles per hour, silent, relentless, and just 12 minutes away. Phase 1 was complete. Russia had successfully defended the sky. The problem was simple. Ukraine wasn't attacking the sky. They were attacking the ground, and the door was now wide open for the next 3 defensive layers to fail catastrophically. At 5 minutes past 2 in the morning, the swarm crossed the 70-mile perimeter. Now the situation became critical. If the S-400 represents the long-range telescope of Russian military air defense, the Buk M3 serves as the middle management of destruction. Unlike the operators in the rear, these crews don't fall for decoys easily. Inside the Buk battery command vehicle, the atmosphere was cold and professional. No celebrations here, just the hum of high-powered cooling systems and the rhythmic ping of solid three-dimensional radar lock. These systems are specifically engineered to detect low-flying objects within Earth's clutter. 2 batteries rotated their turrets, and within seconds, 14 9M317N missiles roared off their rails with a deafening screech. The night sky over the Volga River transformed into a scene from a major action film. These missiles weren't just flying, they were hunting. For the first time that night, Ukrainian operators back in Kiev felt genuine pressure. Telemetry screens began flashing red as connections to 20 Bayraktar drones suddenly went dark. One Neptune missile took a direct hit to its fuel tank, blooming into a massive fireball that illuminated the river for miles. Inside the Russian command center, generals leaned forward, eyes wide. They believed they had found the kill switch. To them, the swarm was disintegrating. They observed the losses on their screens and assumed the mission was finished. Russia was celebrating what appeared to be a miraculous comeback. But here's where the artificial intelligence brain of the 2026 edition Bayraktar drone changes the entire equation. These aren't simply remote-controlled toys. They are flying computers. The moment onboard sensors detect a Buk radar lock, the drones trigger an evasive cascade. They begin to jink and weave, calculating wind shifts and radar pulse intervals in milliseconds. Think of it like this. The Buk M3 is like an irritable old man with an expensive shotgun, and the swarm is a cloud of angry hornets. He might hit a few with lucky blasts, but he can't stop the entire cloud. The drones dive even lower, using terrain masking to position limestone cliffs and thick tree lines between themselves and Russian radars. It's a high-speed slalom at 200 feet. Russian missiles designed to intercept fast-moving jets found themselves struggling to track targets, literally hiding behind rows of pine trees. Out of the 14 Russian missiles launched, 65% missed their targets, slamming into muddy riverbanks or detonating harmlessly against Volga cliffs. The tension in the Russian bunker shifted from triumph back to pure confusion. They expected clear screens. Instead, when the smoke settled, 50 drones and 2 Neptune missiles were still there, closer, faster, and more determined than before. Russia almost won the middle round, but the swarm was still functioning. The middle managers had just failed to close the deal, and the drones were now entering the 20-mile red zone. This is where Pantsir guns were waiting, and things were about to get extremely loud. At 10 minutes past 2 in the morning, the swarm was now less than 20 miles from the Kazan plant. We were officially in the dead zone. 5 Pantsir vehicles and 2 Tor units rotated their turrets simultaneously. The quiet night shattered with the sound of dual 30mm autocannons. These guns fire at a combined rate of nearly 5,000 rounds per minute. Imagine a wall of glowing green tracers tearing through the sky. It was surgical violence. The Pantsir systems began shredding the Ukrainian swarm. Missiles like the 57E6 screamed off the rails, turning Bayraktar drones into falling debris. Within seconds, 25 drones were vaporized. One of the 2 remaining Neptune missiles took a direct hit from a Tor M2 and disintegrated in a spectacular overhead explosion. Inside Russian point defense vehicles, operators were sweating, but they were grinning. They saw the kills accumulating. They believed they had finally broken the attack's momentum. To any observer, it appeared the Ukrainian swarm was in total meltdown. It looked like the mission was about to end in a flaming pile of failure. Yet this is exactly when the overload cascade entered its final deadliest phase. The swarm didn't panic. It split. This was a pre-programmed tactical maneuver that caught the Russians completely off guard. The remaining drones divided into 3 distinct groups. Group 1, the sacrificial element, dove straight at Pantsir radar arrays. They weren't attempting to survive. They were forcing the systems to focus on them. Group 2, the digital assassins, activated short-range electronic countermeasure jammers. They flooded Russian frequencies with electronic noise, specifically targeting fire control links. For 45 critical seconds, 2 of the Pantsir units went blind. Their screens filled with static. Their guns stopped firing. It's like a waiter being asked for 10 different orders at the exact same time. The system just locks up. The Tu-160 units attempted to pick up the slack, launching 8 more interceptors and downing 8 additional drones. Russian command was screaming over the radio, "We got them! The swarm is gone!" They were wrong. While they were busy swatting at the distraction and fighting the static, Group 3, the strike group, slipped through the gap. 22 Bayraktar drones were now inside the final perimeter. They were moving at full throttle, skimming just 50 feet above the ground, weaving between factory chimneys. The tension was suffocating. Ukraine had lost 60% of its swarm. On paper, it was a bloodbath. But in reality, those lost drones were the entry fee to get the real killers to the doorstep. Russian guns were still roaring, missiles were still whizzing past like angry hornets. The air was thick with the smell of cordite. But the mathematics had shifted. Russia spent billions to build this wall. Ukraine just found a way to make it blink for 45 seconds. That's all they needed. The White Swan was now just 120 seconds away from a violent wake-up call. At 15 minutes past 2 in the morning, we were now less than 5 miles from the Kazan plant. This was the end of the line. Russia was about to throw its final haymaker. The Krasuka-4 electronic warfare system. The air around the factory became a thick soup of invisible electromagnetic energy. This isn't just a jammer, it's a black hole for signals. Instantly, GPS went dead. Satellite links vanished. Radio communication became total static. Inside the Russian command center, there was a sense of smug relief. Officers watched their monitors, convinced the drones had just been blinded. Without GPS, a normal drone would simply fall from the sky or fly in circles. To make certain, a Tu-160 battery opened up with rapid-fire cannons, shredding 5 more Bayraktar drones as they struggled against the electronic storm. To the Russians, this looked like final victory. They believed they had just toggled off the Ukrainian brain. Only 17 drones remained out of 70. That's a survival rate of less than 25%. Russian generals were likely already drafting the mission accomplished report for the Kremlin. But here's the plot twist that transforms a defensive win into a strategic disaster. The Bayraktar drones weren't listening to radio anymore. They had entered silent hunter mode, using a combination of high-precision laser ring gyroscopes and AI-driven optical sensors, similar to what you'd find in advanced self-driving cars. The drones were seeing the ground. They were comparing the factory's physical layout to preloaded satellite imagery in their onboard memory. They didn't need a pilot. They didn't need a signal. They just needed to see the shape of the hangar. While the Krasuka-4 was screaming into the void, those 17 remaining drones executed a perfect pre-programmed final dive. At exactly 17 minutes past 2 in the morning, physics took over. The 17 drones didn't just hit the factory, they hit the soft skin of the Tu-160M. Their specialized thermal warheads detonated inside the engine intakes. We're talking about a directional jet of plasma reaching 5,200 degrees. At that temperature, high-grade titanium, the very material Russia can't replace because of sanctions, doesn't just melt. It deforms and loses its structural integrity instantly. The NK-32 engine wasn't just broken, it was surgically liquidated. The secondary impact struck the nearby component warehouse. A chain reaction thermal event began as stored jet fuel and specialized lubricants ignited. Russian defense was successful in terms of numbers, but a total failure in terms of results. They shot down the majority of the swarm, but couldn't stop the 17 that mattered. The White Swan was no longer a strategic bomber. It was now a $270 million paperweight sitting in a puddle of molten titanium. Ukraine spent approximately $850,000 on that swarm. In exchange, they neutralized a $270 million strategic bomber and decimated a warehouse of engine components Russia literally cannot replace due to titanium sanctions. That's a return on investment exceeding 30,000%. The Kazan Gorbanov plant is the only facility handling these specific engines. By crippling the test benches and component stockpile, Ukraine didn't just break one plane. They put a massive under-repair sign on the entire Tu-160M production line. So what do you think? Is the drone swarm the ultimate equalizer? If you think this was a masterclass in return on investment, smash that like button. Subscribe to Nora Blake so you don't miss our next deep dive into the mathematics of modern warfare. Comment below which was more impressive, the F-16 decoys that blinded the S-400, or the AI-driven drones that ignored electronic warfare entirely. Share this video with anyone who still believes expensive defense systems guarantee victory. The question isn't whether Russia had an unlucky night. The question is whether any military is ready for what comes next.